Ladies and gentlemen, we're back. I am so thrilled to be back in a multitude of ways. One, back live streaming. Big Ten TED Live is back and in living color, ladies and gentlemen. And I am thrilled to just took a nice break. It's important, folks, to take a break every once in a while. Clear your mind, because college football, especially right now, with realignment, there is sometimes it's you need a break right now. and that's what I was able to do the last week. I am so pumped to be back here right now. So here's what we're going to talk about tonight on Big Ten TED Live. This is going to be, I'm finally going to give my thoughts on Oregon and Washington joining our beloved Big Ten. It seems like we've been talking about on this very channel. We've been talking about Oregon. We've been talking about Washington for a long time, it seems. And finally, I'm going to give my thoughts. Finally, Oregon and Washington are officially members of the Big Ten Conference. So we're going to talk about that here tonight, because there's a lot to break down. There are many different angles to break down. There are angles within the Big Ten, right? Our 14 schools right now. And there's some angles to break down out west. Later on during the show, I am going to be joined from Tim Prangley, co-host of the Trojan Conquest show, Sunday nights, Voice of College Football, USC channel. He's going to give me some West Coast perspective, because USC for a little bit maybe thought, hey, we got the West Coast, we got the Big Ten, we got that combination all to ourselves. Well, maybe a little bit UCLA. But now, Oregon and Washington in the Big Ten, how does that kind of change things from the USC perspective? So we're going to get into that with Tim here in just a little bit. And we may have a surprise guest towards the end of our show. We may have that. So stay tuned, folks, for that. Things are changing. Things are going right as we speak. Kind of like conference realignment, right, as a whole. So stay tuned for that. So we're going to talk about that. Some other things to kind of talk about before we get into Ducks and Huskies. Stay tuned for some cool stuff I've got later on this week in the channel. Fall camp has started within the Big Ten, and I've got camp reports from guys who have been to Minnesota camp and guys that have been to Penn State camp. I'm going to be talking to Kane Robb from Locked On Golden Gophers. A lot of Ethan Kaliak-Manis slander, should you say, here in the preseason. So we're going to talk about, see how the Greek Rifle is kind of looking at preseason camp in Dinkytown. We're going to be talking about that. Zach Seiko from Locked On Nittany Lions, going to be talking to him about what he's seen out in State College as well. So stay tuned for those. Now, during my break, I was able to kind of recollect my thoughts and think. And you could probably guess, with Tim being on tonight's show, talking to Kane Robb, talking to Zach Seiko, talking to all these guys, you're going to be seeing a lot more guests here on Big Ten TED. And I am so thrilled about that. I'm so thrilled to be talking to people throughout the conference, creating a network and creating a connection with some of the other great content producers, whether it's YouTube, whether it's website, whether it's television, whether it's radio, really looking to expand my network all across all the great content creators across the Big Ten. If you haven't already, it's a great time to subscribe. You get an update when we're going live, when videos are uploaded. Once we get into football season, folks, it's going to be every day. It's going to be every day. There's going to be previews. There's going to be reactions on Saturdays. Still going to be doing live streams. It's going to be Big Ten football all the time. All right. A lot of you are already getting involved big time in the show. A super chat is a great way to support the channel as well. One last thing I want to tease before I talk about the Ducks and the Huskies. I am going to have a Big Ten predictions live stream. I'm going pretty deep into this one, because I'm going to be predicting every single Big Ten game that's going to be played this season. We're talking about who wins, we're talking about score, and we're talking about division winners, and we're talking about who hoists the championship trophy in Indianapolis at the end of the season. So that's looking August 22nd, 23rd, 24th. kind of the middle of that week as well. So Big Ten live predictions. I know the people are probably gonna disagree. Okay, that's the nature of predictions. People are probably gonna disagree, and this has been tough. I've been working on these predictions for a month, and there are some coin flip games, folks. There's some teams where I think, hey, maybe they could win 4 games, maybe they could win 8 games. There's some teams in there like that. Is it your team? Tune in to find out. I'll have updates on Twitter and on YouTube when exactly that live stream is going to take place. All right, folks, let's get into it. Ducks and Huskies. Oregon and Washington, members 17 and 18 of the Big Ten Conference. This has really been in the works for the better part of a year. Ever since USC and UCLA were officially admitted as members 15 and 16 of the Big Ten Conference, Oregon and Washington have been knocking at the Big Ten's door, and finally the Big Ten answered and say, hey, yeah, come on in. So I want to break down a couple of different points as it pertains to Oregon and Washington being the newest members of the Big Ten. First of all, this is our world. This is our reality as college football fans right now. Okay, whether you're a traditionalist, whether you're maybe in favor of the new age, the new wave of college football, no matter where you stand, this is the reality of the situation. Okay, the Big Ten now owns the 4 biggest brands on the West Coast. The 2 brands in LA, USC football, UCLA basketball. Yeah, that's pretty good. Then you go up to Oregon and, of course, Washington and Seattle, west of Texas, west of the beautiful Rocky Mountains where I was last week. West of that area, these are the 4 biggest brands in college football. Now, what does having those brands on the West Coast really mean? How big of a deal is it? I think we're going to find that out over time. Okay, I think having USC, I think having Oregon are really good ads. I think Washington I want to see maybe more consistency out of Washington, right? You had some good years under Chris Peterson. We'll touch on that in just a minute. Kind of went down under Jimmy Lake. Kalen DeBoer looks like he has the Huskies kind of going in the right direction right now. Oregon and Washington. If you're a Purdue, if you're a Maryland, if you're kind of someone, you're not at the bottom of the barrel, but you're not at the top of tier 2, this is not the news you wanted to hear. Because the Big Ten, with these 2 ads of Oregon and Washington, is going to get a lot tougher, especially in that tier 2. We know tier 1, who that's going to be. Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, USC. Those are your big boys. Those are your elites. But then when you look at the Wisconsins, the Iowas lately, Minnesota has put together a couple of 9-win seasons. When you get into that tier, I'm going to list off some teams right now. Wisconsin, Iowa. I think you got to throw Oregon and Washington, what they've been able to do lately in the Pac-12. I think you got to throw them in there. Michigan State, they're up and down, but they could be in that area as well. Minnesota, Nebraska is hoping to get in there as well. Look, I didn't even mention Purdue, who just came off of a Big Ten West title. I didn't mention a Brett Bielema coach Illinois team who appears to maybe be on the precipice of another 8-win season. Like, there's a lot of solid teams in that group. That's what's going to be funnest to watch. Like right now, the Big Ten West is so fun to watch. You can talk about whether it's a good division or a bad division all you want. But the one thing you can't deny right now about the Big Ten West, it's fun to watch. That tier 2, those teams that I just mentioned, it's going to be fun to watch them go to work, definitely within that tier. There's a lot there. Who's going to stand out? I didn't mention UCLA also in that tier. And if Dante Moore turns out to who maybe we think he's going to be, they can maybe be in that tier. Point I'm trying to make, Oregon and Washington add to the depth big time of the Big Ten Conference. Let's see how these 2 teams have done. Since 2016, Washington is 58-25, 4 10-win seasons. A majority, of course, coming under Chris Peterson. This last one, they won 11 games under Kalen DeBoer last season. They have a college football playoff appearance. How about the Oregon Ducks? Since 2018, 45-15, 4 10-win seasons, 2-2 in bowl games. Kind of like Washington with Chris Peterson. That was a lot of Mario Cristobal. Of course, Dan Lanning, great hire. Excited to see what Dan Lanning and Kayla DeBoer, how they can stack up in terms of Big Ten coaches. Very excited to see kind of what can happen. But the record shows that these are 2 solid additions. Will they compete with the Michigans, the Ohio States, the Penn States, the USCs in that tier number 1? I don't know. I don't think so. Maybe not right off the bat, but the depth of the conference is going to be so good. It's going to be so big. Why is that a big deal? The main move and why conference realignment is really happening in general, it's money and it's television. You know who likes this move the most? Fox, CBS, and NBC. Because there are some weeks, this week in the schedule, as much as it maybe pains me to admit that as a big Big Ten guy, that maybe when Fox and CBS and NBC are drafting games, there might be some week where who's ever drafting third maybe doesn't exactly get the greatest games. Now you throw in Oregon, a team that a lot of people nationally recognize. You throw in a Washington, a team that looks like they're on the rise and looks pretty good. Now that bolsters the television product a little bit more. Now maybe instead of seeing Iowa against Indiana, now we see Iowa and Oregon. Ooh, your ears just perk up a little bit, right? Now I'm flipping through the channels. Now, baby, I want to watch that traditional Big Ten Iowa Hawkeyes, that great defense against an Oregon team that could have an explosive offense. I think it really helps it from a television perspective as well. There's more depth in terms of more big games. You've been hearing Colin Cowherd say it for months, maybe years. He says college football has a big game problem. If that is the case, the Big Ten is maybe coming in and adding a few more big games to their schedule. Look, you can talk about the value all you want. We talked about it a lot on this channel kind of throughout the previous months and when this was all rumored and possibly going on. But right now, on the football side of things, this is going to add a lot of depth to the conference. Personally, I'm excited. I would consider myself maybe more of a traditionalist in terms of the way I view college football. Do I wish the Big Ten was 10 teams? Yeah, probably. Do I wish the Pac-10 was still around? Yeah. But that's not the reality. That's what I started this off with. That's not the reality of where we live anymore. If we're going to blow things up big time, I would like to see the Big Ten own the West Coast. I would love to see the Big Ten go into the Southeast. One final thing I want to touch on right now here in this monologue. I did not think the Pac-12 would go down like this. I knew it could happen. I knew there was a possibility that this could happen. But for some reason, I don't know, my gut was telling me, yeah, maybe Georgie K is going to figure it out at the last minute. He's going to figure it out. Yeah, Colorado might leave. Maybe Arizona will leave. Things like that. But I just had this feeling that they'd figure it out because it is so hard to kill a conference. Even the Big East, when they were rated by the ACC, even the Big East was able to stick around as a non-football league. Right? When you talk about college basketball, the Big East is a highly respected conference. Right now, you look all across this country over the past 20, 30, however many years you want to go back, it's a Southwest Conference. The Southwest Conference side, and they really had their own problems. I thought the Pac-12 was going to figure it out. They didn't. And I hope we really celebrate Pac-12 football in this final year because the Big Ten and the Pac-10/12 had a great relationship. That great Rose Bowl relationship for so many years, so many great non-conference matchups. I really hope we celebrate the best of Pac-12 football. What they have on the West Coast this season, they've got some good quarterbacks. It's going to be a fun league, definitely, in 2023. So I'm excited to see what this all entails this season with Oregon and with Washington. So, as I mentioned before, it was going to be USC and UCLA just kind of on their own over there on the West Coast. Now you got Oregon and now you got Washington. Let's bring in our guest right now. His name is Tim Prangley from the voice of college football at the USC channel Trojan Conquest Sunday nights over there. Tim, how you doing today?
Great, Ted. Thank you for having me on. Appreciate you bringing me in. Been a big fan for a while. You know that I've been hitting you up in the DMs and leaving you comments for quite some time now.
We've been working on getting together on something, and no better time. This Oregon-Washington news is kind of very interesting, especially from the fight on perspective, especially from the USC perspective right now. So what I really want to touch on here first with you, Tim, is I want to go back a decade or so when Texas A&M joined the SEC. They kind of had a really good combination. they were able to say we're the only school in the state of Texas that plays in the SEC. And now USC, I guess UCLA too, but USC was the power. We're in California, the ripe recruiting ground of Los Angeles, and we're in a Power 2 conference in the Big Ten. Now Oregon and Washington step in, those pesky Ducks and Huskies, right? They step in. Where do USC fans stand on the Ducks and the Huskies coming in? You got company on the West Coast now in the Big Ten.
Yeah, a lot of the conversation has been about travel. A lot of the conversation has been about what's going to happen with your non-revenue sports, or even
right.
And so it actually is quite a benefit on a number of levels. I mean, I'm still hoping they add more from the Pac-12. It would be, there's still some really great teams in the Pac-12 that are being left behind. That I definitely would be in favor of adding, as well as whether it be partial share or whatever at this point. I do see the benefit of it. And quite frankly, just for the history of it, people are saying that the Pac-12 is dead. I just look at it as an army divided, so they might not be the Pac-12 in name, but we'll all be looking at each other and how well we're doing in different conferences. Like, for instance, Utah going over to the Big 12, I absolutely see them dominating that conference for a while. Yeah. They have the pieces in place. So I don't know how UCLA, USC, Washington, Oregon are going to do in the Big Ten. But, I kind of see it as us four, in some way, a loose group together, invading the Big Ten, and see how we're going to do together as well as individually.
So I had three main talking points coming in with Tim. I want to branch off on something that you just said right there. You're talking about more schools in the Pac-12. I assume by you saying that, you're talking about the Berkeley boys, Cal, and you're talking about the boys on the farm, Stanford. Cal and Stanford right now, especially today, making headlines. ACC, American Athletic Conference. Right now, do you think Cal and Stanford would be beneficial adds to the Big Ten over there on the West Coast?
Well, it's been laid out a bunch of ways. It depends on what you mean by beneficial ads. Yeah, I mean, it's the Bay Area. That's a pretty big market. If you're talking about just TV markets by itself, you're talking about one of the premier universities in the country, and then search plug yours. Also, the number one public in the country in Berkeley. So, what do they add? Immense. Also, people tend to forget. They talk about Stanford as in Stanford started playing football 5 years ago. Stanford's been around for a long time. Heisman Trophy winners. McCaffrey should have won a Heisman Trophy earlier in the early part of the last decade. They were killing it, And again, I think part of that has to do, there was a vacuum due to sanctions and stuff with USC. But, when you get the right coach, and you guys know in the Big Ten with Jim Harbaugh, you got Jim Harbaugh in there and he turned things around. Then David Shaw came in. So with the right coaches, you could absolutely win at Stanford. Again, it has the media market. I don't know, what's going on with the ACC. I don't know if this is maybe their way of saying, hey, Big Ten, if you want us, you better grab us quick. We're not going to be on the back burner. Again, but when it comes to realignment, it's really not really my thing. I'm not going to really try to speculate on it. But again, I would welcome it. Yeah, absolutely would.
Just want to say a quick hello to our buddy G Green's joining us here in the chat tonight. Another great resource for USC football over there. The thing about, I just want to touch on this before we kind of go on to our next point here, Tim, when we talk about Cal and Stanford. When you talk about athletic departments, not necessarily revenue sports, basketball, men's basketball, and football, which Stanford and Cal have, let's be honest, have been struggling in. You talk about Olympic sports, Stanford is as good as it gets, folks. I think Cal's in that same category as well, but Stanford is as good as it gets. Now, how important is that? Of course, revenue sports and drawing eyeballs is a big deal. Travel, you mentioned, is going to be another big objective because they play a 20-game conference basketball schedule in the Big Ten. So with the 4 schools out west, that means 6. So 6 out of your 20 games are going to be in the Pacific time zone. That means you still got a handful of games that, and then you divide those in half. You maybe have 7, 8, a handful of games that you're still going to be traveling on the basketball schedule where you're playing 2 games, where you're playing 3 games kind of every single week. I want to go into my second point here. We kind of talked offline before the show. Oregon is probably, out of the West Coast schools right now, Oregon is probably the biggest competition for USC in terms of recruiting, Southern California recruiting? Does them coming into the Big Ten, in your opinion, kind of change anything? Or is it still the status quo where USC should, under Lincoln Riley, still should be able to control that area?
Well, as the last week has shown us, what's happened in the past, you can almost throw that out the window to some degree. But I think it's pretty safe to say, if you've watched USC through the years, if you've watched college football through the years, and I've talked to Mark Rogers many times about this. So as far as the Big Ten, so when I look at it this way, I look at programs like Ohio State. It's not explaining what USC is in college football, right?
Yeah.
When you look at Ohio State, they have an incredibly high floor, meaning you're not going to see them have a horrible year, like in pretty much our lifetimes, right?
Right.
So they do that. However, they don't really go crazy like Alabama's done over the past 12 or so years. Okay, they just don't do that either. USC is the latter. When USC is hot and they're playing. To give you an idea, if you have like a John McKay, right, / Robinson combination, during the 1970s. I hope I don't get this wrong, but during the 1970s, USC absolutely went on a tear against the Big Ten. Like amazing. If you look at what happened during the Pete Carroll years, they were 5-0 in big bowls against the Big Ten, and I think 8-0 overall. They just didn't lose. And we're not talking about just losing. I'm not going to name teams, but we're talking about playing the Michigans, the Penn States, the Ohio States, in the shoe. And coming away with wins, 8-0 during that decade. So what USC is when they're on top of their game is a juggernaut. I mean, people can get mad and hate on USC all they want, but history has shown you get the right coach at USC, they're going to do a hell of a lot of damage. And so I was trying to say, so in the 70s under McKay and Robinson, 16-1 against the Big Ten.
Jeez, don't remind me.
Now remember, those games are against the Ohio States, the Michigan, the Rose Bowls, and whatever. So, but then you could also have the decade like the past decade where, I think they still, actually, no, they still had a winning record, 4-3. But, I watched those Holiday Bowls, right, with the wrong coach.
Sure. And
you get a physical Iowa team or a ready, prepared Wisconsin team. They're going to come in and smack USC right in the face.
Sure.
So USC is just this program where if they have their ducks in a row, no pun intended, they're going to be able to handle things, right?
Yep.
So your comment about Oregon, on my show, I said this. Oregon's going to win recruiting battles. They always have. Against Kiffin, who was a great recruiter at USC, had some great recruiting classes. They let DeAnthony Thomas get away. It's going to happen. You're going to have stars, for whatever the reasons. And it could be as much as, they're LA kids that want to get out of LA. Sure. It could be that they want to go. They like the position coach up in Eugene. It could be for a million different reasons. But what usually gets highlighted, so when a Mateo Uyunglele goes up to Oregon, or they get another battle with Josh Connerly and he goes up to Oregon. What you have to realize is that, what about all the battles that USC won? Like, we can name 1, 2, or 3 that Oregon's won, right? And Connerly actually was what? He wasn't even a California kid. He was up from Washington, I think. So, I mean, so they get all these big publicized, wins over USC, but what about the dozens of wins that USC takes over Oregon all the time? Because all those guys on USC's roster, Oregon offered them. So, yes, Oregon with Lanning, who's a great recruiter. Obviously, Oregon's success going from Rich Brooks to Bellotti, into Chip Kelly and Helfrich. Not so much after that, really. I mean, you do. Well, I mean, Taggart was kind of an eyesore, and he bailed. Cristobal, had it going. Cristobal actually started getting their offensive line moving again. They've had some dominant lines.
Yes.
I'm hoping that that history repeats itself, and that's this: if USC is serious playing big boy football, putting money into the program, and getting the right coach, I'm not worried about pretty much any team. So no, Oregon's not really a big issue.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see how this whole dynamic with Oregon and Washington. The first thing, maybe the second thing. The first thing I heard is like, well, yeah, they've been trying to knock at the Big Ten's door, basically, like I said, ever since USC and UCLA came in. But the second thing is, where do they slide into the Big Ten as kind of the Big Ten guy and seeing, like I mentioned in my monologue, that's that tier 2 team, and it's kind of hard. I mentioned this about UCLA. UCLA, I could see him if Dante Moore ends up being this all everything guy, And Chip Kelly, we'll maybe talk about this because we talked about this offline as well. If Dante Moore ends up being a great guy, I could see UCLA being a 7-8, maybe a 9-win team. Who knows? Some years, but I could also see them being a 5-win team. I could also see them being a 6-win team. Let's kind of shift in that direction that we talked offline a little bit. Your crosstown brother, UCLA right now. Chip Kelly, recruiting hasn't exactly been too hot since he's come back really to the college game at UCLA. Yes, you've gotten Dante Moore. No question about it. We know how good he can be. How do you feel in terms of the crosstown recruiting battle? Do you maybe see UCLA as more of a possible threat, or Oregon? How would you kind of compare those two kind of going forward?
Chip Kelly is kind of his own animal. I really don't understand it. USC has always out-recruited UCLA in LA, but as far as battles between individual players and stuff, it's always been a battle as long as I've been watching football. But with Chip Kelly, however, that really has kind of changed. I don't understand his philosophy. If someone does tell me, talk about your sleeping giants, UCLA, has all the advantages that USC has, except for maybe the tradition part of it. But they're in LA. They're a great university. And they have shown in the past that they can recruit with anyone. Look at the number of All-Americans, Hall of Famers, draft picks they used to have. But then all of a sudden now with Chip Kelly, he's bringing guys like Carson Steele, running back stud, going to be great for them this year. But he's not really working the high school ranking, high school recruiting like past coaches have done. So when you talk about me being worried about Oregon, of course I'm worried about Oregon, but I'm also worried if one day UCLA decides to flip the switch.
Sure.
And also under Don James, you got to go back a little farther, the Dog Father. But under Don James, they were killing it in recruiting in LA. Now, granted, they got busted and it was proven there was some shady stuff going on as well. But all four of these programs can recruit with anybody in the country if they have the right coach and they're doing the right things. But again, I will say that history proves that if USC is doing everything right, everything being equal, USC should not worry about the other three.
So we know based on what you just said, USC, you're saying it, I'm saying it. I think a lot of people out there are saying it. When we take a look at these West Coast 4, right now, USC is that number one program. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Okay, the other programs are good, don't get me wrong, but USC is the number one. They've got a great coach that can develop NFL Heisman type of quarterbacks. It's crazy. I've covered that in a video before, how it's crazy what Lincoln Riley has been able to do at the quarterback position over the last 5, 6, 7 years. Where do you see these other teams stacking up in terms of those West Coast 4 as we go to the Big Ten? Oregon, Washington, UCLA, those are teams, I think, quickly before I have you chime in here, Tim, the Pac-12 is going to be so competitive, I think, this year. And those three teams right now and going forward seem very even. Where do you see those kind of teams evolving in the Big Ten?
Yeah. So it's a tier. It's hard for me to do, right? Because you just look at the top of the Big Ten right now. Do we say it's Michigan? Do we say it's Ohio State? Who do we say it's going to be?
I got four. I got Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, USC. That's your clear tier 1. Those are your elite teams. And then you got to go down to your tier 2.
Right. And then I think we were talking earlier about the tiers, and that's pretty much what I said. You have there, and there's a drop down. I think that, and I will say this, I don't think it's like a little dip. I think it's, if you talk about potential, it's a pretty big drop, to be honest. But with you guys, Wisconsin getting fickle, with Rule, with Nebraska Rule, that's gonna be really interesting to see what's going on there. I don't know. I would have to put those two very squarely in that second group, and I think with the right coach, UCLA is also in that group as well. I mean, that tier 2 group right now got really crowded.
Oh my gosh.
And if you're, like I think you said actually a little while ago, you were saying that if you're that little group right below there, or trying to get in that tier 2, you just went, oh man, really? You guys we're fighting to get up there, and now you bring these programs in. I think that room got a lot more crowded, which is also great because you look at the coaches. You know what I mean? Here's when you want to see a great conference. When you talk about, what's the best conference in America? When we start saying SEC, look at these. You look right at the coaches. You go, yeah, man, those are some really good coaches. But now you're looking in the Big Ten. You look at the top 6 schools in the Big Ten right now. those coaches, those are pretty headline coaches you got going in the top end of the Big Ten slate. So you're right. Those 4 would definitely be the top tier. And then you drop down and you're going to have those other teams, because the funny thing is Oregon over the years actually has a losing record against the Big Ten.
I tweeted that out today. Someone, I think over at the Ohio podcast, put a nice graphic together. Is their record is not very good against the Big Ten. And now you kind of mentioned before about, and this has been brought up many times, whether it's been Twitter or YouTube that I've been able to see. We go back, and USC's track record against the Big Ten is very good. You mentioned McKay, you mentioned Robinson when you're talking about the Bo Schembechler teams at Michigan that won Big Ten titles. You're talking about, like, you look at Bo and what he was able to do. He won, Bo and Woody. Don't get me wrong, they won a lot of Big Ten titles. Big Ten teams won a lot of Big Ten titles, obviously, over the years. But when they got to the Rose Bowl, it didn't go their way most of the time. I think that's when you look at historically, and a lot of those times, USC was the opponent. So I think but I will say this, and I've said this to multiple people before. There's a difference in playing one Big Ten game in your backyard, Pasadena, California, as opposed to playing 9 Big Ten games at Kinnick Stadium, at Camp Randall, at the Big House, at the Horseshoe. Let's go in this direction. Do you think USC, I think they're going to be fine. I've mentioned before, they're in that number 1 group. How do you think they'll compete in the grind of the Big Ten? Because it's a physical grind on the football side of things. When you got to play good defensive teams, when you got to play Iowa, when you got to play Michigan, when you got to play Ohio State, when you got to play those teams, you're talking about 1 game compared to 9. How do you think the adjustment of the grind of a season is going to go for a team like the Trojans?
Yeah, Ted, with all respect, when I hear things like that, I don't think that people do respect the Pac-12 enough. I mean, it's not like we're playing two-hand touch-out. And I know the rest of the country wants to think that, but the bowl games overall, not in the past 1 or 2 or 3 years, I mean, just in general, has shown that USC is just as physical as any league. Matter of fact, I remember going into the Orange Bowl against Oklahoma. All we heard for weeks and weeks and weeks was how they're going to throw around these California boys or whatever. And by the fourth quarter, they're begging USC to run the ball and run the clock out as they're getting smashed 55-19. So, and I saw USC go up against some really tough Michigan teams, a couple of them in that Pete Carroll decade. And we showed you some of those defenses. We went toe to toe with the Big Ten. I think that right now they're in the midst of building up the roster that's going to be needed. The bigger guys. It came up on our show this week about the fact that there is a need to get bigger, maybe on the defensive line. But USC it's not like USC has been devoid of having that big run stuffer somewhere in the middle. Where you have guys like Sean Cody or Cedric Ellis or Mike Patterson, Stevie T, Antoine Woods. We've had our number of 300-pound guys. They're going to be space eaters and do it. So it's not like you can't get those guys on the West Coast. And the fact that with the NIL and with the transfer portal, the days of you need a big defensive tackle these days, it's becoming really more national as far as NIL is concerned as well. So I'm not concerned. I think if you want to comp, let me ask you. Let me throw it around at you real quick. I mean, I have mine right now in my head. Who's your comp for USC in the Big Ten? So if you had to say, okay, who's the Big Ten USC? Who would you say they are?
That's Ohio State. That's the first one that
how's
comes
Ohio
up to
State done?
They've done pretty damn good.
So really, that's my comeback when people tell us that.
But it depends where your barometer of success is for USC. If USC wants to win the Big Ten title every year, look what happens when Ohio State, when they go head-to-head and play bully ball, Michigan. Like that's, I think, it depends. Like some people think Ryan Day's on the hot seat right now. I don't think Ryan Day's on the hot seat. No. When you win 11 freaking games every year, you ain't on the hot seat. But
how many Big Ten games he lost in his career? 2?
I want to say 2. I think you're right.
Yeah.
Well, he
you're
lost
not going to get fired when you lose 2 games. Yeah.
I think he's beaten everybody outside of Michigan, right? The last 2 seasons. I could be wrong on that, but I believe that's what's happened. But that's what I'm saying right now. Like USC, Ohio State is the comp to answer your question, and it's gone pretty well for them. And this is not going to go on forever. Ohio State is going to be able to get it done against Michigan, believe it or not, as much as the Maize and Blue fans might think this is going to go on forever and ever and ever. And I think, okay, here's a little teaser for that predictions. I think it's going to be a three-peat this year. I think Michigan's going to do it again. I think Michigan has the potential to not lose a single football game this season. That's how much I believe right now in Michigan. But USC, like, I've said this on your show the other night. Okay, I'm born and raised in Wisconsin, living in Minnesota. Like, I am a Midwestern guy. I'm a Culver's guy, right? I love the Midwest in every single way. But when I see USC come into this conference, okay, I don't want to say it scares me a little bit, but I understand the threat that it provides. I look at all those West Coast teams. Like, look at Michael Penix and what he is, a Heisman dark horse this season. Look at what Bo Nix, even though, he's on his 89th year and he won't be playing Big Ten football, I don't think. But, I look at Oregon. I look at these teams. Okay, there's a difference between one team and now you got 3 or 4 teams that can do some things on the offensive side of the football. I don't think they're going to come in and change the way Big Ten football and how you are successful in the Big Ten. But when I look at teams across this conference, you're going to have to get better. Like, you're going to have to score. Sometimes if Illinois is playing USC, you might have to score 35 to 38 points to beat them. You might have to go toe-to-toe with their offense, okay, because we're used to it. When we get to November, Minnesota and Iowa, what was the score last year? Was it 10-6? I can't remember exactly what the final score was, but with these West Coast teams, there's going to be better offense on the West Coast. You're going to need to have that balance on that side of the ball to be successful with these West Coast teams. There's so many interesting variables with these teams, Big Ten versus these West Coast teams. So let's move on to another thing. So we talked a little bit offline about USC. We think that they're in that top tier right now. Do you have any, and maybe I can come back with where I feel these teams sit right now. Do you think an Oregon, do you think a Washington, a UCLA eventually down the road could maybe compete at that top level? Or do you think it's just going to be so tough with the Michigans, the Ohio States, the Penn States, the USCs to really break into that category?
When I think of those teams, I think of potential.
Okay.
Right. You look at potential, and if you get it going, because I'm a Trojan fan. I see what a team with a ton of potential can do with making the wrong choices. And so to say, can I see any of those 4? I absolutely can see all 4 of them with the right alignment. As far as, and now you see one thing, you guys, Big Ten, you got to remember is these guys have been working on a Pac-12 network budget.
Yes.
Things have just changed all of a sudden for these programs. USC is coming in and UCLA with the full amount. I think that the Ducks, with that Phil Knight Nike money, will be able to make up the difference. Washington, they've got a great alumni, but I'm not sure. That might be the one issue that they may have. It's just keeping up financially. Yeah. But I would say that. UCLA, I'm saying Chip Kelly better start winning. I think that this is going to change the attitude in Westwood.
So
I think.
Go ahead. Yep.
No, I just think that they are going to get a taste of this. They're a proud program. It's not like they don't want to win. And I think that having this situation, I'll tell you one thing. When I heard Chip Kelly was coming to UCLA and we had Clay Helton, I'm like, it's over. We're screwed.
Right, yeah.
I did not know just how poorly that man recruited, thank God, because I was just thinking to myself, because he's a great X's and O's coach. There's no denying that guy can coach. Yeah. I don't know what he's doing, but I'll tell you what, I don't think UCLA is going to put up with him going, 8-4 every year. Because they have been on the rise. They went 8-4, 9-3. They could have been 10-3, really. And they have the potential, Ted. So short answer is all 4 of them couldn't compete for a league title if they had the right coach. Yeah.
I'll say this, and you might come back with something else. 8-4, which Chip Kelly, what he's won 8-9 games, I think, something like that, the last 2 seasons in the Pac-12. 8 or 9 wins in the Pac-12, a lot different in the Big Ten. Once you get to that Big Ten schedule, it's just that is a wild card for me. I'm going to keep on saying it, but I won't. Go ahead.
Who has a tougher schedule this year? Michigan or USC?
USC does. Yeah, USC does.
So in some years, I would agree with you with that the Big Ten scheduling and schedule and teams, etc., can absolutely be a grind and a tough one. You know, I mean, if you have to face Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State all in the same year, and hell yeah, that's a hell of a run, right? But some of those guys at the top, like Michigan, they're outside a couple of games, it's really, if you look at that schedule, especially the non-con for that thing, it's pretty basic. So I think I hear what you're saying about the grind, but again, last year, the Pac-12 had 6 teams in the top 25, and I have all the respect in the world for the Big Ten, but I don't think there's a huge gap between the Big Ten last year and the Pac-12. I really don't see it was that big of a gap. I mean, you can tell me I'm wrong.
Here's the way I see it. I see better teams at the top of the Big Ten. I see the Pac-12 as a good cluster of teams. That's kind of the way I see it. I look at the depth. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for. The depth of the Pac-12 this year, which will, from all accounts, be the final season of Pac-12 football, is like this year especially, it is ridiculously deep. Okay, but when I look at the top of the conference, okay, look what happened in the Rose Bowl, what Penn State was able to do against Utah. Now I know Cameron Rising was injured for a lot of that game, and I understand how big of a deal that was. But when I look at the top of the conference versus, say, the top of the Pac-12, I see more elite teams. Like Penn State, let's call it for what it is. Penn State is a playoff contender this year, folks. Penn State is that top 10 program. Maybe they're not Ohio State and Michigan in that top 5. USC, kind of thrown in there as well. But Penn State is no slouch. I've said it many times on this channel. The year of the Nittany Lion is 2024, folks. Drew Aller is going to have a year under his belt. You're still going to have Singleton and Allen back in that backfield, which is crazy to think what they did as true freshmen last season. Abdul Carter at linebacker. Like, there's going to be so many guys back in 2024. I just think the top right now of the Big Ten is so strong. And then as you kind of go down a little bit, I think it's very tough to compare. Like I said, the Pac-12 and the Big Ten. Is it an apples and oranges thing? I would just love to see them kind of go more head-to-head. Obviously, we're not going to see that anymore. But, go more head-to-head in kind of non-conference battles. I think people nationally sleep on a lot of the Big Ten depth. I think they sleep on Brett Bielema in Illinois. I think they sleep on P.J. Fleck in Minnesota. I think Iowa was the butt of every joke last season. But people, I shouldn't say everybody, some people nationally don't appreciate the greatness of Iowa's defense the last 2 to 3 years. Like, what they've been able to do on defense, they're doing the exact opposite on offense. And I think that's kind of taken away from some of that. I think the depth of the Big Ten is, people just think of this, a lot of people think of the Big Ten as just 3 yards in a cloud of dust, lumbering defense, run the football type of league, which is true to a certain extent. There are physical teams. Nebraska's looking to get more physical. We know what Illinois is kind of becoming, but I just think don't sleep on the depth of this league. But the other thing, like we talked about, we're kind of coming full circle here with the Ducks and the Huskies coming in. The depth is going to make, when Illinois maybe previously could have gone 8-9 wins, maybe they'll win 5 or 6, because of Washington and because of Oregon in this conference. Tim, I kind of want to finish something out with this. I kind of want to finish off with you what I finished off my monologue with. From all intents and purposes, this, unless some crazy miracle or additions kind of come in, this is going to be the last season of Pac-12 football, right? 100 years or whatever it's been that the Pac-12 in some form or another has been around. When you kind of heard Utah, Four Corners are going to the Big 12, Oregon, Washington's going to the Big 10, what was your reaction knowing that this season is going to be the final year of Pac-12 football? And are you going to kind of take in some of these matchups a little bit more, appreciate them a little bit more, knowing that this is it for Pac-12 football?
I don't know if you caught what Lincoln Riley said when they talked about, the collapse and everything and them leaving. And I kind of really, when he said, he's articulated it better than I could. It's like in the Pac-12, we've never been like the SEC, like this group. You know what I mean? I've been following this football my entire life. I don't ever remember sitting there going, "Come on, Pac-12, win this game." You know, I've never really been that way. Really, I've all been about USC and USC being number one and USC doing this. Maybe because USC usually is competing for the top, I don't really rely on my conference in order to feel this group thing. But at the same time, it also is my childhood, and I do remember playing all these teams and watching them throughout. So there is going to be some nostalgia to it. And actually, the first thing I thought of when I saw it was, I just thought the fact that, thank you, the rest of you, because it would be really, really uncomfortable for USC and UCLA to go through this season, having just forget the target on your back for someone gunning to beat you, but also literally being fans in the stand with targets on your back, because those Pacific Northwest fans love to throw things and stuff. So I mean, I was really looking forward to the fact that now we're not going to have to deal with that. Everybody, the whole thing's getting blown up, and outside of Oregon State, who we don't play, and Washington State, who we don't play, it's just going to be a matter of finishing out the season. I was nostalgic for a while, but now the whole thing's getting blown up.
Sure.
I don't know, and the fact that we have Oregon and Washington coming with us,
right?
With UCLA and USC. Again, for me, if you look at the majority of the past, sure you have great teams with Tedford, with Cal, and we talked about recently about with Stanford. But other than that, really, you're looking at these four schools, and this has been the Pac-12.
Sure. Yep.
You know what I mean? So Oregon's come on late again. Like I said, since Rich Brooks, I almost said Mel Brooks. Since Rich Brooks, it's really been they've stepped forward. Washington's always been doing it. USC and UCLA have been doing it. So I don't really see that. Part of me now doesn't even feel, now you have just two more at four. It doesn't feel like the whole thing's melting away anymore. It's like some of the guys are coming with us over to the Big Ten. So it's a bit different. I am going to go up to, I'm trying to get a ticket for the Cal game to get Strawberry Canyon one more time.
Yep.
Because who knows what's going on with Cal. But other than that, I don't know. I'm really more excited just about USC season. I know it's horrible to say, but I don't really ever sat around thinking, oh gosh, what do people think about the Pac-12? The only thing I really cared about the Pac-12 is, man, they're going to hold us down. If we go 11-1, they're going to say the Pac-12 sucks and keeps us out of a playoff. Yep. That's really what I thought about the Pac-12 for years. So, I'll be excited to watch the season play out. There will be some nostalgia. I'm saying this now, but how am I going to feel when games are ending? And I know, hey, that's probably the last time we're playing this team. And it's kind of weird because also now with Oregon State, that was last year. So I really love the Beavs. They're like my second favorite team up there in the North. Just a gutty little team up there. And so I can't wait. I can't wait for the season to be over, because really it's almost like limbo this season. We're Big Ten, but we're not Big Ten. We're going through this system and playing it out, the games that we have available. But am I gonna be like overly emotional about it? I've kind of grieved that all last year. Once we found out we were leaving, that was a shock. That was a shock back then. Now it's just kind of like, come on, let's just get this over with and move on.
So I will say this here before I let you go. Like it was last year, I'm not as nostalgic about the Pac-12 Big Ten relationship. Well, maybe a little bit. We'll kind of let this develop in what it needs to. Last year was the last traditional Rose Bowl. I fell in love with college football because of the January 1st, the Sunset, the San Gabriels. The Rose Bowl is an American institution. Like, I know there's going to be a point when the Rose Bowl is not played on New Year's Day. And that's what I grew up on. I grew up on, in the state of Wisconsin, my first sports memory, let's see if I can remember this right one, was Ron Dane at Wisconsin rushing for, I thought it was 150, 200 yards against Cade McNown and UCLA. And then the next year, they won 17-9 against Stanford. Like, those were some of my first college football memories. And the Rose Bowl is just... I'm getting chills right now just thinking about it, because I just love the Rose Bowl more than anything. And to see that no longer, as I was able to, the BCS was once every 4 years they played the BCS championship of the Rose Bowl. Okay, you can deal with that. College football playoff, well, you don't have a lot of times the Big Ten champions in the playoff, that kind of thing. And, it slowly kind of lost its meaning. And that's the thing. The Rose Bowl was such a big part of the fabric of the sport and the passion of college football fans in the Midwest and on the Pacific Coast, That's the thing I'm going to miss the most. Now, I'm sure a lot of these other teams from the SEC, from the Big 12, they're going to be pumped to play in the Rose Bowl in a postseason game. They're going to be great. They're going to love the sunset. They're going to love the 90,000. They're going to love all of that. But for me as a Big Ten fan, that was such a point where when I was growing up, yeah, let's go. If a Big Ten team was in a national championship race, yeah, that's great. But let's get to the Rose Bowl. That was such a big part of this. Tim, I want to thank you for coming on tonight. This was a great discussion. Tim, where can we catch you? Where can we see you? Where can we follow you on Twitter? Now's your time to shine.
Well, let me jump there really quick a second, but just go back to that Rose Bowl. Can I add to that Rose Bowl thing you said?
Go ahead.
It really lost that specialness. Do you know what I mean? When the BCS came around, it was at 2002 with Miami, and they started getting mixing other teams into the Rose Bowl. I mean, because before that, I know there were teams, you go back to the early 40s and back, that it wasn't just the Big Ten versus the Pac 8 or whatever it would be, PCC back then, whatever it was. It's kind of already been losing its luster on that as well. But again, if we get enough Pac-12 teams in, we could still have that Rose Bowl thing going again. And that's a little pipe dream people have. I don't know what's going to happen or not, but the Rose Bowl, to be honest with you, it lost a lot. And really now with the playoffs, like you said, everything, that was one thing the rest of the country was jealous about. A lot of people don't like to admit how jealous they are, but that was something special that the Pac-12 and the Big Ten had. And they had, again, going all the way back to the mid 40s. That was just really the granddaddy of them all. And it was a center stage on January 1st. And again, I feel your nostalgia, but man, for me, that magic kind of went away a long time ago when they started mixing in all these other teams coming into the Rose Bowl. But
we got to move on.
What's that?
I said, we got to move on. It's a new era, whether we like it or not. I said that at the very top of the show. Whether we like it or not, the suits that are making these decisions are saying, let's move on. Let's move on to a new era. All right, where can we find you? Where can we follow you? Where can we see you? Go ahead.
Yeah, so every Sunday night, you can find me on Trojan Conquest Live. Rick and I just basically do a show doing the USC news and notes of the week, trying to bring on as many guests as we possibly can. Then starting the season, every post-game, home and away, we will have a post-game show with Rick, Tony, and myself. Nice. You can always find me on Instagram or on Twitter at Tim_Prangley. And once again, Ted, thank you so much for having me on. It's been a lot of fun. And I'm sure we'll have lots of conversations like we do offline about the season and what's ahead for both USC and the Big Ten.
Boy, I gotta focus on all these Big Ten games. Now I gotta watch some West Coast football this season, but I'm looking forward to that. Thanks again, Tim, for being on tonight.
Appreciate it. Thanks again. Bye.
All right. Thanks, Tim, for being on here tonight. Folks, we're going to keep it rolling. We're going to keep it rolling, and I'm excited about this. All right. I am now pleased to be joined, hopefully, the technology, right? We all love technology. This is my first time kind of incorporating guests, right? Drum roll, please, ladies. Right? All right. We are pleased to be joined here by that man, Mr. Greg Flugaur. How you doing? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I am good. The technology is up and running. I'm so excited. Like Oregon and Washington have been trying to get into the Big Ten for a year. I feel like we've been getting together for a year, right?
Yes. I'm so thankful to be on Big Ten Ted tonight. It's going to be always short notice with me. I appreciate you getting me on. I appreciate you welcoming me into your show.
Okay, so let's dive into this Oregon-Washington thing. Right?
I'm all fired up. After
fired
listening
up?
to you and Tim. I'm all fired up.
All right, let's do it. Let's do it. Let's dive into it. Okay, so conference realignment, all the rage right now. You are the busiest guy out there right now. I swear, I pull up my phone. I'm like, he's live again? There's another episode? What's going on here? So I want to talk about, I talked about Tim in terms of the West Coast, all that, but I want to talk about kind of more logistics, some nuts and bolts that you might have a little bit more knowledge on. First thing I want to talk about is the financials of Oregon and Washington coming in, right? They're coming in at a partial share right now, kind of, because I've seen reports of a couple of different amounts. What do you know where Oregon and Washington is going to be financially per year per school when they come into the conference?
I don't think it's known.
Okay.
I don't think it's known. I mean, you see in numbers being 30, 35 million, going to go up 1 million a year, but I don't think it's known. The long form, the media thing still isn't quite finished yet. Not all the T's have been crossed and the I's have been dotted. They're going to come in as a partial share. So I would guess somewhere between 35 and 40 million.
Okay.
Being able to grab advances, right? Get money that, and then they'll, owe that later on. But I am, as you know, Ted, I've been saying for a year, right? It's going to be Oregon and Washington. 5 months from now or 5 years from now, they're coming into the Big Ten. They were always wanted by Fox. It's one of the reasons why Fox lowballed the Pac-12 in media negotiations. There was a lot of cloak and dagger stuff going on. Kevin Warren wasn't the only one who wanted Washington and Oregon. There are always Big Ten presidents who wanted them. And the main reason was because the Big Ten has consensus. Fox Sports wants to happen. At some point, they're going to expand eastward. And to do so, they needed to go westward one more time.
Okay, so I got a couple of questions on you. We're going to branch off that for just a minute. Today, Stanford and Cal, ACC, AAC. Okay, watching you, a couple of other people out there, a lot of people saying they pumped the brakes on Stanford and Cal because of their drooling at the potential of an FSU, of a Clemson, who knows, of a North Carolina, of a Notre Dame. Based on what you know, do you find that to be the truth that they pumped the brakes, or was there just never any chance that Stanford and Cal had any chance to come to the Big Ten?
A year ago, Stanford had a chance to go, but not now. We don't think so. We've been told, we said like a week ago, we reported on Peek Around the Corner, it's cold with Stanford in California in the Big Ten. It's cold. Now, I know there was reports out there that it was, Big Ten looking at options, California, Stanford, or ACC. But we were told the valuation is very low on California and Stanford.
Okay.
Fox is not willing to do it. And I don't think anyone else is going to be willing to do it. I don't think the ACC thing doesn't make any sense to me.
Oh, my God.
I don't see, besides, I don't see why Florida State, North Carolina, Miami of Florida, Virginia Tech, I don't see why those schools would acquiesce and vote to incorporate California, Stanford into the conference and or SMU, even if they made a few $1 million more because they shorted California, Stanford, SMU. SMU doesn't take any money for 4 years.
Sure.
I don't see those schools saying yes. I don't see it.
So whenever that was, I was on vacation. I was up hiking in Canada when all this is going down. I'm trying to take a break for a week. Okay, because Twitter and YouTube, it can be a grind and everything. Like, I'm just trying to get away from this. And on, what was that, Friday? I think it was Friday, when the craziest day. There have been some crazy days. Like, you go back to what was that, 2008, 2009, when somebody reported that Texas Tech, Oklahoma, they're going to the Pac. And then they didn't, right? Remember that? This was a crazy day, right? In all of this. And then today, this by no means did that top that day, but I'm seeing it's crazy just in a different way with what the situation is with Stanford and Cal. And what did I see today? SMU possibly willing to forfeit like multiple
2, 3,
years?
4.
What are we doing here? Like, I'm just like, I am not. Go ahead.
I just think that I don't think I never talk about ACC expansion on my show.
Okay, yeah.
People call in and talk about it. Go ahead, speculate. But I never do a monologue having to do with ACC expansion because we just don't see it happening. Our sources tell us it can happen. It really can happen because they can't expand with any schools that would elevate the current schools. Any schools that would want to sign on that grant of rights to go to 2036. Do you think West Virginia, they've always wanted to go to the ACC, Ted? Yeah. Do you think they want to go and sign that grant of rights to 2036? Nah, they're not. They don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So, yes. So, and by the way, we're both St. Cloud State alumni.
So let's dive into this a little bit, okay? Because there's something going on here, right? We're both college football fans. We both have our YouTube stuff. We're both St. Cloud State graduates.
Yes.
Okay, and maybe if I look out my window far enough and I really squint my eyes, maybe I could see Greg across the metro here.
You probably can.
We've got an East Sider.
I'm not that hard to see.
We've got an East Sider and a West Sider here in the Twin Cities Metro. Over here. So we got that going on. Now maybe we'll do like a Gopher meetup or a live something at some point.
But you're an evil Badger, so
I'm from Wisconsin.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
All right, let's dive into a few more things here. Maybe based on what Tim was saying before, and I just want to hear your.
I'm fired up.
You're fired up. Let's do it. You're fired up? Minnesota, Nebraska is how many days away? Are you counting down?
It's August 31st. I'm not good at math. Minnesota math is not good. I'm telling you. This state is not good at math, and I'm a fine representative of that state.
And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But where do you think these teams stack up? I talked about it in my monologue here tonight. Oregon, Washington. If you're a Purdue, a Maryland, maybe not if you're bottom of the barrel, but even if you are, it's going to be tough. Like that tier 2 past the first 4, Oregon, Washington, Wisconsin, Iowa, Nebraska's trying to get there. Illinois, Iowa, I might have mentioned Iowa again, but you get the general idea. Like you could have a team that in a 14-team Big Ten goes 8-4 and they might be 5-7. Where do you think these teams stack up?
Well, I can just see myself now. Preseason magazine comes out and the Gophers are predicted to be in 14th place, and I'm going to be upset because they weren't predicted to come in 12th place. And I'm going to be furious. I'm going to do a whole episode on it, a whole live show, and people are going to say, what's the point, Greg? You're 12 or 14, it makes no difference. It's going to be rough. It's going to be tough. This year, even before this happens, I've got the Gophers taking a couple steps backwards. I got them finishing 6-6, 7-5,
6-6,
7-5.
All right.
Because if you could, Big Ten Ted, if you could promise me,
see what I can do.
If you could look into your crystal ball and promise me that the Gophers would not suffer any injuries in the back 7 of their defense, then I could get to 8-4. Then I could say we got another shot at a 9-win season. The Gophers have won 29 games in the last 3 full seasons. That is the best stretch of 3 seasons for the Gophers since 1962 to 64.
Wasn't that like their national? Didn't they win national titles in the early 60s, if I remember correctly?
They won in 62. So,
62, okay. Gotcha.
So, or that was the last time they went to the Rose Bowl.
Rose Bowl, gotcha.
So this has been a great stretch, but I've got them taking a step back because they're so thin on the defense. And according to these August, I call them August practice. People call them fall practice. The reports I've been received, there's still, there's battles for the linebacker positions, the cornerback other than Justin Wally. We're thin. Gophers are so thin.
Yeah.
So, and of course, I think the worst because I'm a Minnesotan. I think we're going to have some injuries, and we have the incredible tough schedule this year. So I'm taking a step back. Going forward, I think I got your tier 1. I absolutely agree with you, Ted. On the tier 1. The tier 2 is this long list. Basically, the teams that I won't have on the tier 2 is Rutgers, Nebraska. Until they.
Oh boy!
Come on, they haven't made a bowl game in 6 years. What are we talking here?
We'll get to that here in just a little bit when we talk about Gophers and Huskers.
That's about everyone else is tier 2 as far as I'm concerned. Wisconsin's a step up. Iowa's a step up. But they're all just. It could go either way.
So let's talk about it. Let's talk about Minnesota, Nebraska. We'll maybe get back to conference realignment here in just a little bit. But now you got me juiced. Let's strap it on.
I'm jacked.
Strap up the helmet.
I want to say something about what Go ahead. It's your show, but
No,
but
you go. You got the floor. The
The
floor
whole
is yours.
thing about
baby.
USC, Oregon, Washington, UCLA coming in isolated games, Oregon versus Wisconsin,
Oh, gotcha.
right?
Yep.
Okay, USC versus whoever, Minnesota, Iowa. Yes, the Big Ten West schools going to be in a little bit of trouble, right? But you line up Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota on your schedule. You line up those 3 games in a row. I think people on the West Coast, with all due respect, don't quite know what's about to hit them. Just like what Nebraska went through, Ted, you have to, if you're playing Big Ten schools week in and week out, you better have a backup defensive tackle. You better have a backup left guard or right guard who can play, because you're going to get smashed. Even if you're beating the other team, you're going to get smashed. PJ Fleck, the lowly Minnesota Golden Gophers, right, who barely got brought up in your first part of the thing, 4-0 in bowl games under PJ Fleck. And we were, 2 times bigger than any of those teams we played? I mean, we beat Auburn on a January 1st game in 2019, okay? And I'm sorry, we pushed them around. We have pushed everybody around outside of the Big Ten West. And we're the lowly Gophers, right? So I'm giving out a warning. If any USC, UCLA fan, Oregon, Washington fan, speak to these old-time Nebraska guys. And it took them a solid decade. Steve Sipple and these reporters from Nebraska, 93, 34.7, they finally said, yeah, we had no clue. Scott Frost, head coach of Nebraska.
Oh, I know.
What did he say? What did he say?
Big Ten's going to have to adjust us.
Big Ten's going to have to adjust us. I was laughing. I was rolling on the floor. This was day 1 of Scott Frost being the head coach of Nebraska. And he announced that the Big Ten was going to have to adjust to Nebraska. Nebraska wasn't going to have to adjust to the Big Ten. And it was over for the Nebraska program at that point in time. You knew they were going to struggle.
Yeah, so let's.
You see, I'm all fired up, Ted.
Lot to break down here. I'm a fan. I'm a fan of what's going on right now. Let's talk about the first game. Maybe we'll go back to realignment here in just a little bit, but we got to go with the flow of the show here right now. That Minnesota-Nebraska game to me is such a swing game, right? It's such a swing game for both teams right now. Right, little bit of a preview for my prediction show later on. I think Gophers take it. I think Nebraska's going to get a lot better as the season progresses. I really believe that, because I always thought Scott Frost had talent. Consistently recruiting top 25 classes nationally, top 25 to top 30, top 5 in the Big Ten. Now, once they hit the portal, half of those guys were gone, but that's, once again, they got frosted. So Nebraska, I really like Matt Rule. Every single time I see Matt Rule talk and I see what he's doing, it just makes sense to see what's happening at Nebraska. How do you see that game going down as of right now? Because even though Nebraska is still fairly young, or fairly new, I should say, I still see that being a competitive game. But Minnesota, they've controlled the series against Nebraska as of late, and right now I just think it's going to take a while for the Huskers to get kind of gelled together.
It was Minnesota -8. Now it's Minnesota -6.5.
Okay.
Big Red is throwing their money down on Nebraska. Gopher fans, now is the time to jump on the -6.5. Or if you want to wait a little bit, it'll probably go down to 6. Matt Rule is a great coach. I did not like that Nebraska hired him. I thought that was a big blow to programs like Minnesota. I was hoping for another blunder. The one aspect of Matt Rule that I think is a little bit of a worry point was his decision at the quarterback position in the NFL. He was terrible. At Nebraska, the first decision he makes is to bring Jeff Sims in. Now I'm hearing reports out of Nebraska. He's great talent, got a cannon on the arm, he can run.
Look at his stats at Georgia Tech.
Yeah, he's okay. I'm not impressed with Jeff Sims at all. Having said that, They're going to be formidable. The game could go either way. I got Minnesota. But the Jeff Sims thing has got me a little worried. On the flip side, the Greek Rifle, Kaliak Manis, Minnesota. 247 Sports comes out with a ranking of the top 69 quarterbacks in Power 5. And where does my Greek Rifles, where is he ranked? Dead last in the Big Ten, number 67.
There's no way. You can't tell me right now. All right, now you got me worked up. You can't tell me right now that Ethan Kaliak-Manis is a worse quarterback than Gavin Wimsatt. You can't sell me on that. There's no way. There's no way.
I was hardly in. There's no way that 66 quarterbacks on that list could have played Wisconsin better than Kaliak-Manis in Wisconsin at the end of last season as a redshirt freshman. I was blown. So, look, Kaliak-Manis, I'm not saying that he's a polished player. He's not. He's a Greek Rifle, but he's also a wild stallion out there. He's going to make mistakes that Morgan did not make. But Morgan, his floor hit the ceiling. I mean, there wasn't any space between his ceiling and floor. Yeah. Kaliak-Manis, his ceiling is like this, and his floor is way, way down.
Like, look what Tanner Morgan did. And I was about to say Tanner Mordecai. Look what let's not go there. Look what Tanner Morgan did in 2019. Like, he almost threw 30 touchdowns, almost 3,000 yards. Now, I'm not sitting here and I'm not saying this is going to be 2019 all over again, because it's not. 11 wins, nearly went to the Big Ten championship game. But I will say this. The weapons, they're not Rashad Bateman. They're not Tyler Johnson. But they're pretty good. They're pretty good. They're going to – here's the thing. I believe the weapons for Minnesota is going to make Ethan Kaliak-Manis better. It's going to make it easier for him. You got one of the best tight ends in the league. St. Cloud, former St. Cloud Tech Tiger, by the way, in Brevin Spanford. The transfers that they've brought in, watching the spring game, like, what was that? Slant route after slant route after slant route, Greek Rifle to Elijah Spencer. I just look all around this offense, and then the running back by committee that I believe is going to be pretty good. I've heard a lot of good reports out of true freshman Darius Taylor. Look, they're probably not going to light the world on fire, but they're going to be in the mix. I believe that in almost every game that they play this season, and that, they've got shades of 2019. Maybe it's 2019 light at Minnesota this season.
It's that depth on defense.
Yes.
Special teams. Supposedly, we're going to have a decent special teams this year. I doubt it. I'm not going to believe it until I see it. I know at some point in the Iowa game this year, prime time, NBC, Minnesota's going to be pushing Iowa all over the field like they have done the last couple of years, but lose. But yet we push Iowa around, but we lose. At some point, Iowa's going to make the interception. They're going to make the great special teams play, and the Gophers are going to be in trouble.
So here's what I'll say. First of all, let's talk. This is kind of shift things from – we've been talking a lot of Gophers, which when you get get two Minnesota residents, two Twin Cities residents on the show, that's probably what's going to happen. All right.
Well, I don't talk Gophers on my channel. So
this is your opportunity. This is a safe space for Gophers talk here. Okay. All right. So let's kind of now I kind of lost my train of thought. First thing I wanted to talk about, Minnesota and Iowa and NBC. That's the prime time, I believe. I believe that's the same week. Michigan and Michigan State is also on NBC. I believe. Or maybe they're different weeks or something.
I don't know.
I forgot. But whatever it was, I remember seeing that, where those are two pretty big rivalry games right off the top. Do you think part of this going back to conference realignment for just a second, do you think part of this Oregon-Washington thing, we talk about the depth of the league, in the Big Ten. Do you think that's part of that is TV? Part of it is like, well, we don't want the third game of the week to be Maryland versus Northwestern or whatever. We want more quality TV matchups. Do you think that kind of fed in and contributed because this year they might be seeing, well, some of because they have that Fox, CBS, and NBC.
Maryland versus Charlotte.
Yeah, you're exactly in non-conference. They have that draft, right, where they kind of rotate the top pick and everything. Do you think that kind of goes into it? Is it's like, we don't want a we don't want a lower tier Big Ten matchup, because sometimes that's the way the schedule shakes out.
Yeah. Oregon is a brand multiplier, and you hit it early on your show tonight. Oregon versus anybody in the Big Ten, that's going to elevate the ratings. You're absolutely right. That played a huge part in it. That's the biggest part in it. Fox wanted Washington and Oregon into the conference. It was just about timing. When was it going to happen? Was the Big 12 going to be able to crack open the Pac-12 so the legal counsel, the legal people at the Big Ten would allow the Big Ten to approach Washington and Oregon in an official way? And it happened. But that's the biggest point. And I think what Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA fans are going to recognize early is that Big Ten country watches Big Ten football. That's not what they do in the Pac-12. So UCLA versus Illinois game, it's going to get more eyeballs than UCLA fans think they're going to get.
Yeah.
I think that played a huge part in it.
So no pun intended. Which usually means the following pun is about to be intended.
Yeah.
You had a lot of smoke for a long time on Colorado, right? And that was kind of the first shoe to drop in all of this. And I was watching it from afar, and I'm sure just like Tony Petitti in the Big Ten was like kind of just waiting to pounce, watching it from afar, of a thing. And as how do I put this kindly? As maybe not as good a job as George Kliavkov maybe could have done throughout this whole. I just thought they'd find a way to stay together. Mm-hmm. I don't know why I thought that, but I just had a hunch that they'd finally found a way. You talk about what you hear from a lot of people on your channel. Did you think when you're kind of processing all this information through your mind, did you think that the Pac-12 was eventually going to collapse?
On February 9th, I did a show saying, don't panic. Nobody panic. Pac-12, nobody panic. On February 24th, I did a show saying, now the odds have flipped and the chances are that Big 12 is going to be able to poach one or more schools. And the reason I did that on February 24th and never changed throughout the 5 months is because we were told the numbers that ESPN and Fox offered the Pac-12. There were such low numbers, Ted, that it just gave an incredible signal to everybody that the networks did not want a one region, Pacific Coast region conference any longer. We also heard, and there were schools in the Pac-12 that weren't going to go for a major streaming media package. It's not ready yet. We're not ready. It might be on the come, but it's not ready yet they were afraid their front porch of the universities were going to get buried behind a big streaming media package.
Yep.
So on February 20, so then I don't want to bore your listeners, but
you're good.
About mid-April, late April, we were told that there was going to be something special, and a special event between the Big 12 and Colorado.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we called it the hot bubble of action.
The hot bubble of action. I love the catchphrases, by the way.
Day after day, I'm saying there's going to be a hot bubble of action, but I couldn't talk about it.
Yeah, right.
On April 28th, we got like 3 different confirmations that it was happening May 7th in Chicago. We didn't have the Chicago information.
Sure.
It was May 7th. Colorado was going to sit with the Big 12. Now, this was April 28th. And you know how things move, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe Colorado walks away from this meeting. But every day I talked about the hot bubble of action. On May 7th, it happened in Chicago, a meeting that lasted an hour and a half. It was their second meeting between Colorado and the Big 12. We had so much detail at that meeting. On May 8th, I started my live show saying the Pac-12 just got a shot to the solar plexus. Again, I couldn't talk about it at that time. But the Pac-12 is still standing because obviously Colorado had not applied to the Big 12. I talked about it on May 9th, May 10th, May 11th, May 12th, May 13th. I couldn't bring up the word meeting. I couldn't bring up May 7th. I couldn't bring up Chicago. The reason the meeting happened on May 7th on a Sunday, because on May 6th, a certain very important person in the Big 12 daughter was graduating from the University of Indiana. Okay, that happened May 6th. We knew that. Okay,
Yeah.
We knew the meeting couldn't take place April 30th because somebody very important at the University of Colorado might have been a wedding in his family. Okay, so this is how detailed this information was coming in. When the meeting happened and Colorado was setting it up, suddenly we got information that May 24th, this was about May 17th, May 24th, there was going to be a donors meeting at Boulder, Colorado.
Okay.
The Minnows. They went, they had a meeting. It sounded like the donors were saying, go for it. Go ahead. Go to the Big 12.
Sure.
They had a Big Well meeting, May 31st, Newport, California. The Big Well said, okay, let's do it. So we thought it was going to happen in the middle of June. It didn't happen, and eventually happened. So that's why we had all this smoke in Colorado, because we had all this information that we couldn't share, but we did in our made up Holy Smokes Theater, where we try to give people information without giving up our sources.
So I'm going to ask you, and feel free to just say thanks, but no thanks for this answer. But I got a couple of questions.
Yeah.
You say you can't talk about certain things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to say that because I know you got to dance around some stuff, and I'm trying to be as respectful as possible. Like, if you came out and said all of this stuff, what would you say? Like, what would be the consequences? Why do you feel can't you? Are there bigger outlets out there kind of protecting their story, or how does that whole process? And feel free to, share what you can share, but that's just one thing, because I've heard you say that multiple times. I'm just curious how that whole process kind of
so the USC story, when we broke that on March 31st, 2022, we went 3 months and talked about it, and the Los Angeles Times did an article on it.
Yep.
I was alone. I was getting fed that information that was leaked out of a donor in Los Angeles. It was confirmed by donors in the Big Ten in a certain possibly unethical way. The information was given to me. I distributed because, first of all, I was sort of instructed to do, but also I had nobody else. I was not throwing anybody else any bones. During these other stories that we take on, there are bones being thrown. I'm going to take you behind the curtain here.
Sure, let's do it.
I might have a window of information, a dot, I call it, where we're trying to connect the dots. I might have a dot. I might throw it to somebody that I know within college football who are a lot more bigger and powerful than my little channel.
Sure.
So I'm able to throw bones. They throw huge bones back at me. And I know if I unleash with really specific information, I'll never be able to harvest the field again, right? I want to be able to come back, so I can't burn them. But I'm allowed to, because of good communication. I'm going to say this.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's why I feel free that I can say that Colorado is at the center of the stage, hop a little action, and I let people guess what it is, but I can't. Eventually I said, before Colorado made the move, before even articles were written up, I said to people watching the channel, I said, there was a meeting in Chicago. It was May 7th. The reason I was allowed to say that eventually, before it was written up anywhere, was Pete Thamel came out and said, early May, Colorado and the Big 12 had a meeting.
Okay.
I think that was sometime in late June, People can Google it. When I saw that, I got the okay. I said, okay, I'm just unleashing what we know.
Yeah.
So
right. You got to protect your sources. I learned that
I
reporting 101 at St. Cloud State. You got to protect your sources.
You can't harvest. You can't get the next.
Right.
You can't. Yeah.
Exactly. Wow. That's a very interesting, because I think people that watch your channel, they hear this stuff kind of going down, but how does it all kind of go about? So another thing I want to talk about, like, as long as we're kind of going behind the curtain ish, so to speak, you're getting this information, and this information might be, and you're thinking in the back of your head, the Pac-12 could die. And I'm sure you've been a college football fan for a long time. Yeah. And we talked about it with Tim. We talked about the nostalgia. We talked about Big Ten, Pac-10 in the Rose Bowl, and all the tradition that goes into college football. And you're hearing all of this information. Do you ever kind of just sit there and think about the gravity of this information? And do you ever think like, man, this stinks? Or what's kind of when you're hearing, because when you deliver your content, you're very honest, you're very forthright. Like I said, oh man, this stinks. There's not a lot of opinion, so to speak. There might be a little bit, but there's not a ton of it in terms of what you're gathering. You're distributing the facts as you have received them, kind of. But do you ever think in the back of your head, oh, they shouldn't do this, or this, like, especially with the Pac-12 stuff? Oh man, that's not good. That's not going to work.
I started doing that right when I got the USC information.
Sure. Yeah.
And I said that in the article, the Los Angeles Times. I said consolidation's coming.
Okay.
Eventually, and then when I started my YouTube channel, it was August 10th. So 2 days. It's going to be a year in 2 days. The very first, like, a couple episodes, I said, Oregon, Washington. We were told that that the Big Ten was going to take them on in when the timing was right. And we were told that before the USC thing was announced. So this stuff has been planned, and the USC thing hit me hard. Because first of all, I'm sitting on information that no one believes.
Yeah.
You can go back through my tweets, web message boards, but we knew we had it, and there was incredible amount of documentation about it. We knew that USC was doing all they could to come in, and that the Big Ten was accepting them. And we knew that this was going to affect other schools down the road, like Washington and Oregon. We believed at that point Stanford. So yeah, it hit me hard as a big fan. Pac-12, Big Ten, yeah, it hit me hard, and I said it at the time on Twitter and everything when people weren't believing me. The era of consolidation was revving up. USC was making the same type of decision that Oklahoma and Texas made. That they had the era of. So there's always been schools that had more money than other schools, right? Mm-hmm. There's always been bagmen, right? There's always been schools with bigger brands, bigger alumni. But the advantages you have now to have more money, to have more ticket sales, to have bigger alumni, to have bigger collectives now that we have collectives, the advantages of having all that is bigger than ever. You can take advantage of that, okay? Yeah. That is why, as we sit here August 8th, 7 days away from August 15th, as written in the ACC bylaws, that is why Florida State's making all this noise.
Sure. Yep. Because
that money advantage is going to mean more than ever. And it hurts. It hurts us old. Well, you're not old, but I'm old. It hurts us old guys a little bit because
I don't know after hiking in Canada, my knees are telling me that I'm old. Let me tell you, that was the first time, and I'm like, oh man, here it comes. Anyway, but yeah, I get what you're saying. I had a question in here from somebody, and now I have to scroll up to find it. So just give me a second here. I'll find it. Maybe I'll find it again. Anyway, but we'll go to we'll kind of move on to some topics. So we talked about what you're thinking in the back of your head as this is kind of going along. Do you think Okay, these moves that are going to happen with the Four Corners going to the Big 12, with what we're seeing in the Big 10, do you think anybody will ever regret any of these moves? Do you ever think that something maybe isn't going to work out how any of these schools anticipated, or maybe a conference kind of going forward, or maybe anticipated moves like a Florida State, or some people try to get out of a grant of rights and that? Do you ever think that there's going to be a move that maybe some people will look back on 10, 15, 20 years down the road and said, that shouldn't have happened?
That's a great question.
I'll just, while you're thinking about that, I'll kind of give my thoughts on this. I'm obviously, this is a Big Ten channel. I'm so pumped about the Big 12, though. I'm so pumped about what that league has become. I'm so pumped that BYU is in a power conference. I watch a lot of, I know you've appeared on Big 12 Mafia's show. Great show for those of you maybe that want to get some Big 12 love in your life. You know, Big 12 Mafia, it's a great show over there. And BYU fans, one thing I've learned about BYU is that that's a big fan base. If maybe, like you watch this channel and maybe you're not maybe as in touch with, maybe fans across the country, BYU is a bigger fan base than you might, that's a nationwide fan base that you might realize. I don't know right now if there's any team that might regret a move down the road. I could maybe see something happening in the ACC with some of these legal issues that could come about with trying to get out of this
huge risk by Florida State if they actually attempt to do this.
Yeah.
But then again, maybe it's a huge risk if they don't attempt to do what they're about to do because they're about to get buried. We talked about it at Peek Around the Corner. Florida State might be tapping into a private equity firm, JP Morgan Chase. And we were told that they might be doing this right now because they feel that as the years go on, even next year, the next year after that, the next year after that, the value of the athletic department is going to drop because they're going to get buried by the SEC teams that's around them. They're going to have this big, huge money advantage. The Florida State alumni boosters aren't going to be able to keep up because they're going to be double dipping for NIL and everything else that you need for facilities and coaches and everything else, while the SEC donors are just going to have to just pay for NIL because the media money is going to be such a big advantage for the SEC schools and the Big Ten schools. So that's why Florida State might be willing to risk because they think they're going to get buried and get die of 1,000 cuts.
So here's the question that I was able to find.
Yep.
From Matt Reeves wants to know, after all this activity, Greg, do you still have a little bit or a lot that you still can't talk about?
There are things that I can't talk about that happened with the USC story.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. So there's still a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, there's still a lot. And I'll never be able to now I did tell things to Los Angeles Times and things that they were able to confirm that, but we couldn't put it on the article, things like that. When I talk about cloak and dagger on my show, the cloak and dagger that was going on with the Big Ten donors and Kevin Warren and the Big Ten office was very dramatic. There was no trust in Kevin Warren. Remember, this is coming off the pandemic where whatever side of the issue you were on, people were very, I'm going to say the word depressed about how Kevin Warren could not communicate to the Big Ten presidents. Yeah. The lack of communication to the student athletes, the student athlete parents was dreadful. The lack of communication with Kevin Warren and his media partners were dreadful. They wanted him out. So, the cloak and dagger, when the reason why I was hooked into the story is because they wanted the Big Ten to know that they knew. And again, I know this sounds crazy. I went through a whole episode 22, long time ago on my show, and I went through the whole thing of it. But 9 9 times on Twitter that I mentioned USC and Big Ten. Each one of those 9 times, quickly afterwards, we were followed by a Big Ten official on Twitter.
Okay. Yeah.
We captured the images.
Sure.
Some of it was the minute afterwards. Some of it somebody was controlling that official's account in the Big Ten. I was told I was going to get bookmarked. They bookmarked me. I know it sounds crazy, but we documented everything, all the pictures, everything, and we sent it to USC 247, Minnesota 247, All Eyes on Big Ten podcast with Big Kurt and Jeffrey the Greek.
If you don't listen, you should. You should. Every time an episode comes out, I'm dialing that thing up in my car. I'm dialing it up. Maybe we'll get Greek on here one of these days. But anyway.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. They're outstanding. So there's stuff I can't, and then it goes deeper than that. But and then how, and I can't get into details, but how the Big Ten donors, a certain group of them absolutely confirmed 100% that USC was going to the Big Ten is something out of a movie. Like, it's just crazy how they confirmed it. And there's things I can't talk about.
Yeah,
but
so
I talk about as much as I possibly can.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely understand. Let's go into a couple of different topics because big topic. I've been watching this Joel Klatt series, Big New Conversations. Every single time he comes on, he talks about we need a commissioner of college football. We need a governing body. For all this conference realignment, you got to go back to 1984, right? Supreme Court versus, I think, Georgia and Oklahoma were a part of this, right? Because you go all the way back, and I've done maybe not as much as you, but I've done a little bit of research on this. The NCAA used to control the TV rights for college football. Then the CFA kind of came in and did things. The first really, and then the Supreme Court was 1984. Notre Dame's exclusive TV deal was a big landmark in all of this. Is there any alternate timeline where this could have been avoided? Is there any alternate timeline where this could have worked with the NCAA? Because they were very restrictive on TV rights. Okay, back in the, I don't know how far we got to go back in the day, but there were only a couple of games on every week on TV, and they were very restricted in all of this. Do you force, is there any, we go time travel, whatever we got to do to get back to that? Do you think that there was any alternative timeline where this could have been avoided?
If you're asking me if there's any alternative timeline to where all the major schools, the conferences, could have gotten together and done a TV rights together.
Together, yes.
Okay. I am going to say no.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. The reason is there is so much difference between the Big Ten and the SEC. There's so much of an institutional difference. There still is a big difference. I know it's layered over. Both conferences make a lot of money. They do things differently, though. And I'm not sure. Yeah.
It's not happening now. Let's make that perfectly clear.
Think it would have happened. I don't.
You think this is, and I've kind of said this a little bit. Maybe we can get into this a little bit more. So you think this was destined to happen? Because I kind of hold the thought that said this was unavoidable. When cable TV was making its rise, before I was born, through the 80s and the 90s, and you saw more networks born than just your CBS, your ABC, and your NBC. It was inevitable. Yes. It was inevitable because college football was, and it always has been really, extremely popular. Yes. It always seems to me, people say, well, this could have happened. They should have done this. They should have done that. And that's kind of why I brought up the alternative timeline to see if you thought that maybe something else could have happened. But for me, I say this was inevitable. As teams continued to grow, Texas was always going to say, well, we're better than the rest of the Big 12. Why are we messing around with whatever? We should play LSU. We should play Alabama. We should play Florida.
Yeah.
Because basically, you're having the NFL is one body. Imagine the NFC North, the NFC South, the AFC East. What if they all operated independently? Imagine that. And that kind of goes with losing rivalries. Like, like what Nebraska and Oklahoma played for years and years and years. And it was a great rivalry. It determined who went down to the Orange Bowl. It was the Big Eight champs. Imagine if the Green Bay Packers said, you know what? I can find a better deal playing with the Patriots in the AFC East. And now the Packers and the Bears aren't playing anymore. That's kind of how I view it. It might seem a little weird to think about it that way, but to be honest, Nebraska and Oklahoma was that type of rivalry for a long period of time. And obviously it's kind of died out a little bit. But when you have, my point that I'm trying to make is that when you have all of the conferences acting individually, and this is exactly what I watched the Tony Petiti episode with Joel Klatt today. And he said the same thing. He might have said the same thing with Greg Sankey. When you have each conference operating independently, of course they're going to do what brings each school, each president, the most money. So by that, I think this was bound to happen. I asked you about an alternative timeline, but it sounds like we're in the same boat.
Yeah, I think we're in the same boat. King Tony Petiti, who's been working on consensus within his own conference, and now he's working on trying to build some bridges to Greg Sankey. Could they make a grand bargain? Could they make a grand deal together to where they set guide rails and agree on things? Yeah, it could happen. It could happen. Maybe I'm too old, I got feet of cement. I don't think it will, but we'll see. We'll see.
Would you call yourself a traditionalist?
A traditionalist who, because I was told stuff, kind of knew that this era was coming.
A little bit of a hybrid there. That's interesting. Okay, yeah. That's interesting.
Yes, traditionalist by heart, but yeah.
Great conversation, great insight. I think on a lot of stuff here tonight in terms of conference realignment, because that's what's happening right now. Let's talk about the Big Ten's future in the Southeast, because that seems to be the shift. The end game appears has come to an end in the West.
Yeah. Right.
Everybody in the West and the Pac-12 have, for the most part, has found their new homes. And maybe Stanford, Cal, Oregon State, Washington State will do so in the next week or so, 2 weeks, whatever. Southeast. Okay, there was some reports from other people months ago. It's going to be a battle for some of these ACC schools between the SEC and the Big Ten. The SEC, to me, seems pretty complacent, says with the additions of Texas and Oklahoma, they seem pretty good right now. Florida State, they already got a school in Florida. Clemson, they already got a school in South Carolina. Can the Big Ten realistically go down and grab like a group of, say, Miami, a Florida State, a Clemson, a Notre Dame? I tweeted it out the other day. If that happens, then you got a competition on your hands.
Yeah.
Then it gets real between the SEC and the Big Ten.
Yeah,
do you think that is real, where the Big Ten could go into SEC territory and grab some of those big names?
Yeah, and I think it will happen.
You do?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, who and when, that's the question. And how does the ACC blow up? When does it happen? How does it happen? I think plays a large part in what schools the Big Ten would be able to get. If the ACC implodes earlier than we all expected, let's say Florida State somehow magically sends a massive check over the ACC and says, here's your exit fee. Oh, and here's your grant of rights. We're paying out $500-600 million check. Here you go. And let's say the ACC feels like they have to accept it. Or they say, no, we're not taking this, but yet a court says you have to take it because whatever Florida State's giving, whatever that is, they get Florida State out. Then I think, with the exception of Florida State, I think that the SEC will be able to eat first for the most part.
If they want to.
So I'm a little different than everybody else here. The sooner it happens, I think actually is advantage to the SEC. If it happens close to 2036, like we all thought it would be because the grant of rights ends 2036, then I think anything could happen, that the Big Ten could eat first, get their first targets. Because if this thing implodes early, like next year or the year or the next 2 years, then I got to feel that ESPN is going to play some part in it, at least an invisible hand in this, or outright play a part in this. And they're going to make sure that they eat first and they're going to get the top targets they want.
Okay, I got to go off of that for just a minute because this has been on my mind for months.
Yeah.
And I don't know. And that's why I'm having you here.
Yeah.
So you could kind of break this down for me. ACC, that's an ESPN deal.
Yeah.
SEC has an ESPN deal.
Yeah.
Can the following happen? Can ESPN say, well, we don't want Fox. We don't want CBS. We don't want NBC to get into the Southeast. We don't want them to take Big Brand, Clemson, Florida State, etc. Can they do something right now and alter this grant of rights to just say, yeah, let's just move Florida State and Clemson over the SEC with no penalty? Because, or how do you negotiate the grant of rights in all of that? Is that possible, considering ESPN is a mutual partner with both the ACC and the SEC?
I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV, even on Big Ten TED. I don't play one on, but that's how I understand it. How I've been told. I got a St. Cloud State. I barely graduated from St. Cloud State.
You and me both.
Well, let's look, how I understand this, and I've been looking at it for years, more than I'm embarrassed to say, the grant of rights is held by the conference, the ACC. Okay. They own this individual school's rights. They cobble those rights together to give the ACC better leverage to negotiate with potential media companies. The ESPN owns the broadcast rights, the distribution rights of the ACC content. So in your example, if ESPN wanted to move Florida State to Clemson to the ACC, okay, but the ACC owns the rights to Clemson, Florida State.
Yeah.
Well, therefore, ESPN would distribute the games, but the money should still go to the ACC.
Gotcha.
And then the money gets distributed to the ACC schools per the ACC bylaws, and it would show Clemson and Florida State are withdrawn members. Therefore, Florida State and Clemson doesn't get paid by SEC.
That's right. It's coming back to me. And I saw this, I feel like, I don't know if it was you or somebody else on Twitter, so the grant of rights, right? And we all heard about the Pac-12 grant of rights, how that turned out. But a grant of rights is between a conference and schools. The network is really nowhere to be found.
Broadcast, distribution rights, that's between the conference and the media company.
Okay.
The conference has to fulfill certain obligations to the media company. The media company has to fulfill certain obligations to the conference. But this grant of rights is between the schools and the conference.
Gotcha.
So I don't think that scenario works. I think if Florida State wants to move to anywhere, the SEC, which they could, or the Big Ten, they've got to either win it in court or offer a settlement that ACC can't refuse. And if the ACC refuses, then Florida State somehow gets the court to say, look, ACC, you need to accept it. Florida, whatever. Florida State's got to win this somehow in the court or in the settlement. That's how we're looking at it. Or it ain't going to work. So it's a big risk move by Florida State.
Jeez, that is.
And Ted, we think they're actually going to do it. I mean, they're actually going to withdraw from the conference and just put all their chips. They're going to have this big, massive war chest. Some of it by loan, some of it not. We had heard that Florida State has most of the exit fee ready to send the check.
I heard that too, that they've been bankrolling, that they've been almost raising money to make this happen.
They don't have the grant of rights money.
Gotcha. Okay.
But they have the exit fee that either between 100 and 120 million, however there's a lot of different opinions on that. It looks like it's 120. Some people think it's going to be a little less. And of course, the history of exit fees, you usually negotiate your way down on the fee. Maryland, when they left the ACC conference, they did not have a grant of rights. They only had the exit fee. And at that point, it was at 52.2 million to leave the ACC to go to the Big Ten. Maryland settled with the ACC, and Maryland was able to get out at like 32.1 million, something like that. So there's a history of getting that exit fee down on a settlement. But yeah, it's going to be in the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of $1 million for Florida State to get out of the ACC, and to even have the attempt to get out of the ACC, okay? But we were told, because of the personalities in that room, because of a certain people in the board of trustees at Florida State, because of a certain athletic director and president, they're actually going to pull the trigger here pretty soon.
Wow, because you said there's a deadline, I think, coming up where they have to make a decision.
If they want to play, if they want to have any chance of playing in a different conference other than the ACC, if they want any chance of joining a different conference, i.e. Big Ten, on July 1st, 2024, the start of the next academic year, they have to have a notice of withdrawal from the ACC before or on August 15th, which is 7 days away. The notice has to be given to the commissioner, Jim Phillips of the ACC, and the other 14 ACC presidents, including Notre Dame. And there are people believe they're going to do it. So serious people. So the bomb's going to blow. Things are going to get crazy. Buckle up, brace for impact.
Lastly, because I got to circle this back to the Big Ten. I have to, because that's what I do. So if this happens, and then the Big Ten seems to be in line to grab Florida State, Clemson, all those schools that I talked about before. If one maybe is Clemson, if 1 or 2 schools do it, what are the chances? We talked about odds before with the Minnesota-Nebraska game. What are the odds that maybe one, we could see Florida State in a different conference next season? And number 2, what are the odds? Because I have heard this before. If the majority of the ACC votes to dissolve the league, poof goes the grant of rights.
Yeah. We don't, I'm not a believer in the 8 votes.
Okay, gotcha.
I think, okay, let's say they do come together and they vote. They still have to win in the courts. We've been told that's just not, and I think if you look back at the Magnificent Seven that was broken by Ross Dellinger, and then Brett McMurphy broke who those were. If it was that easy for that 8th school, for them to grab the 8th school, I think they would have voted, and it's just not that easy. And they've looked at it. Those Magnificent 7 schools, North Carolina State, Virginia Tech, Miami, Florida State, and Clemson, those 7 schools, they could have just gotten an 8th school and done it at that point. Don't think it's that easy. They're going to have to win it in the courts.
It's not that easy.
What was the other?
What were the odds of them dissolving the conference, and then Florida State playing somewhere else in 2024?
Well, now we were told pretty seriously that the Big Ten will not. They'll vet Florida State. They've had talks everybody's talking to everybody, Ted, indirectly. Okay.
Yep.
But the Big Ten will not go down a serious pathway with Florida State until Florida State legally entangles themselves from the ACC grant of rights.
Makes sense.
So if Florida State's going to pull the trigger here, they better, in my mind, logically, but I'm not Florida State, obviously. That's a different kettle of fish in Tallahassee. You would think they would know that they have a landing spot. From what I'm told, Big Ten, although would be very interested, Fox Sports would go crazy over this. But they're not going to move. I mean, shoot, they didn't even move on Oregon and Washington until they were pretty confident that the Pac-12 is going to,
Right.
that there was going to be another school and another school. They're not going to move on Florida State until they're legally separated from the grant of rights. So Florida State, if they pull the trigger, they're going to be a withdrawn ACC member. I think maybe SEC probably agrees with the Big Ten on that, although I do not know for sure. So, yeah.
Crazy. Yeah. All right. So I've seen a couple of comments, and I got to bring this back a little bit. So I've seen some comments that say, a lot of conference realignment talk. We're so close to football season. Okay, let's do it. I'm so sick of lawyers and money and all this stuff. I'm so sick of all this stuff. Here's my opinion on it. Okay? If you're sick of this, you got one guy to blame, Uncle Georgie. If he gets this deal done 3 months ago, which could have gotten it done a lot sooner than that, we'd be talking football. We'd be talking offensive line. We'd be talking defensive line. Because all this stuff would be figured out. That's the way I feel about it. Yeah. That's the way I feel. Because like you said, and I've heard multiple reports based on what you said, is that the Big Ten wasn't going to move on Oregon and Washington until it was clear the Pac-12 was going to come crumbling down. Yeah. So I'm going to wrap things up. We're going to do one. We're going to talk some football. We're going to talk some football. We're going to talk, you guessed it, some Big Ten football, wrapping things up. We talked about Minnesota. We talked about Nebraska. Do you have maybe a team that people in the Big Ten, and we can kind of go back and forth on this a little bit, do you have a team in the Big Ten not a lot of people are talking about right now in terms of a East Division contender and a West Division contender that you believe could be in the race to Indianapolis? And you can't say Ski-U-Mah.
I really don't have a particular.
Okay.
I do have. Okay, well, I do have Penn State winning the Big Ten East.
Winning the East.
Wait, no, that's not it. That's not it.
Okay. All right. Okay.
That's not. I mean, that's not all. I have Penn State going to the college football playoffs. I have Penn State defeating the Georgia Bulldogs 28-23 for the championship, the exact score that they beat Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. I've got Penn State rolling this year. You have them as the 2024 team. I have them the 2023 team.
And they could do it.
I think this team is special. I think it's the year of the Nittany Lions. And I think Michigan, they blew it. They blew it. Defensively, in the locker room, blitzing on every down against Max Duggan.
Oh boy, here we go.
No disrespect to TCU Horned Frogs. Michigan, you blew it. Jim Harbaugh, you blew it. Your defensive coordinator blew it. And I think I think in the back of their mind, something's going to go wrong early in the season. They're going to be checked out. I don't have Michigan. I got Michigan coming in third in the Big Ten East.
Wow. Where do you have them in terms of records? Are they all 11-1?
Buckeyes second, Nittany Lions first.
Do you have Penn State going undefeated?
12-0 or 11-1. They win the Big Ten East. They win. I think I got them going. I have them going undefeated. I mean, the West Virginia game right off the bat at NBC, people are going to witness what the Penn State's going to do. That quarterback, if he is what we think he is, with Singleton and Allen, the running backs, an incredible left tackle. You talked about the linebacker. You talked about the secondary guy. They are stacked. So Franklin, don't screw it up. This is it.
And that's been the thing about our buddy Jimmy Franklin, is that, a lot of people say, if it weren't for a fluke, this is not me saying, this is other people saying, if it weren't for a fluke block kick against Ohio State in 2016, where would Franklin be? He's hanging on to that Big Ten title that they were able to win in 2016, because that was another year where Michigan beat them up pretty good in that season. But that's I'm high on Penn State, but I don't know if I'm that. I mean, but I will say this about what you're talking about, the Nittany Lions. Drew Aller is the most talented quarterback to walk into State College possibly ever.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yep.
Whether
Yep.
he becomes the best, TBD, but he's the most talented to walk in.
If he's ready.
Yes, and that's the big
He's
question.
ready. Kalen King, Abdul Carter.
King and I forgot the other corner's name. Johnny Dixon is the other one on the other side.
It's just, come on.
It's crazy.
I think they're being slept on. As crazy as it sounds, because I think what the coaches poll had them 8th or something. I don't even know. But Penn State, man, I've got them just taking it all.
Wow.
I've got Washington, Florida State, Penn State, Georgia in the playoffs. Now, we got to remember, though, Big Ten Ted, I was Greg the Cooler last year. I got everything wrong.
What'd you pick last year?
Huh?
What'd you pick?
The only thing I got right throughout the whole season, I had Tennessee. They were not a preseason top 25.
Nope.
I said Tennessee would finish in the top 10 in the nation before the season started. That was my only. That wasn't impressive because I got everything else wrong. My winning percentage against the spread last year, it barely registered. Okay, there was one. I was doing so bad that there was 1 week that I did the George Costanza thing, where I did the opposite week. So
I love that episode.
every game that I felt strong, I just flipped it. Yep, and I went 1-7 that week. And I would have went 7-1, but I flipped it because I was doing the George Costanza, and I went 1-7. And my winning percentage barely even dropped because that's all it was.
Oh my gosh. So I'm not going to spoil anything on my prediction show that's going to be coming in a couple of weeks, but here are some of my broad points. I mentioned to Greg, who is a sleeper. I look at Illinois. We have, I'm sure, I love the account Norwegian Gopher on Twitter, and he comments a lot on the stuff I put on this channel, and he continuously says allowing Brett Bielema back in the Big Ten was bad for everybody else. Was bad for then. I respond by saying this way: there are some people in this world that are born to do a specific thing. Brett Bielema was put on planet Earth to coach Big Ten football.
And to beat the Gophers.
You said it, not me. I firmly believe that. That guy knows what it takes to win in this conference.
How they blew the Big Ten West championship last year in the last couple of weeks is just insanity. They should have won that.
Kind of going down the stretch last year, a lot of people kind of gave me a little bit of grief for, well, here comes Ted with his Illinois again. Oh, you're really high on Illinois. I believe, and I know things turned out well for Purdue. I see our buddy Big Time Boiler in the chat here tonight. And here's what I see. Illinois was the best team. Now, they didn't win, obviously, the West.
Yeah.
But I thought Illinois was the best team in the West Division this year. And when you look at Illinois, the schedule is favorable for the Illini. No Michigan, no Ohio State. Here's a tricky one, right? We mentioned the Eyes on Big podcast before. They said this, and I agree with them on this. Penn State, Illinois, in Champaign. This is after Drew Aller, and you talk about Penn State. This is after Drew Aller plays West Virginia. They play Delaware, and they play someone else that I can't remember.
Yeah.
Not a great team.
That's a great point.
That is the first. Now it's big noon, so it's not a night game, whatever. That is the first big test. That's the first test in general for Drew Aller as a quarterback. And you got to face Johnny Newton and Keith Randolph. Okay. All right. What I saw, I can't remember. There's a lot of stuff that happens on Twitter. You wonder why I take a break. There's a lot of stuff that happens, and you can't remember what it is. People are ranking the Illinois defensive line 4th, 5th in the conference.
They're probably better than that.
I just don't know. I don't see it. I don't see it.
You don't see it?
Yeah, I don't see it. Can you still hear me, Greg?
Yeah, I can see. I don't have your signal.
No, my camera got overheated a little bit.
Yeah. Well, you said you can't see it, and then you lost your visual. You lost your camera. No, People are very, very, very high on Illinois' defensive line. Extremely high. Yeah, got it. Yep. Thank you, sir. I took over Big Ten Tech Show. I did it. I did it. I was Gophers, baby. Gophers over Badgers. 2 years in a row. That Gophers have got the axe. It's going to be 3 years in a row. This is a sign of things to come. Thanks, Big Ten Ted. I appreciate